Perfect. Great, Amy. Thank you. You can see my screen, so we'll start. So today's session on our Go International Online Expo is cross-cultural dating, what to expect. So I'll go through a few tips that I've learned, a little bit about myself, and then I'll open it up to questions for you guys. And you can either unmute yourself and ask me the question, or you can just type it in the chat, and then I will look at the chat. So let me change. So cross-cultural dating, the good, the great, and the awkward. I'll go through all these things that I've learned, and I hope that you guys can ask some questions to me and let me know what you think. Okay, so we know there's a language of love, right? Well, what happens when love is spoken in different languages? And then also, more precisely, what happens when two people speak two different languages, but also come from two different countries? Well, I have a little bit of experience myself, and then I've kind of collected some tips that I've learned through my life that I think everyone actually has experienced themselves if they've been abroad. So, first of all, my name is Rachel, and I am American. I grew up close to Boston and New York in the US, and I'm actually a mixture of Chinese and Italian. So my dad is Italian, and my mom is Chinese. And then on the right of the screen, you'll see my husband, Laurent, and he is French. So we come from two very different worlds, two different languages, and two different cultures. So I've learned actually a lot myself living abroad, and also marrying someone from a different country. And so I grew up until age 18 in the US. And then ever since then, I've actually lived abroad. I went to university in Canada, where it was the first time I really was exposed to a lot of different international people because my background, I grew up in a very small town. So it was really exciting for me when I was 18 to move abroad. And then after university, I actually moved to Shanghai, and that was my first experience in Asia. And I thought a lot about Asian culture because of my mom. You know, she's Chinese, so we had a lot of different things that I thought I knew a lot about. But I actually didn't know actually that much until I really moved abroad and met a lot of international people, which was really exciting. And then after my time in Shanghai, I moved to Hong Kong, which of course was another amazing experience full of a lot of international friends and different colleagues coming from all over. And then from there, I met my husband, Laurent, and then we got married actually in Hong Kong, and then also in France, in his hometown. And then we moved to Taiwan. So now we're both based in Taipei, which is another exciting place, and which is also another group of culture that I had never experienced. So I'll go through kind of all the tips that I've learned about dating different cultures, and kind of see what kind of things to be aware of, and what tips that I've learned myself. So there's a little picture about the two of us. Of course, having fun is really important. And we'll go through the relationship tips. So I have 6 tips that I'll go through with you guys. So the first tip, which I think is really simple, but we tend to forget, is actually just communicate. It's really, really important, especially if English is not your first language. So for me, English is my native language, but for my husband, it's not. It's his second language. So of course, French being his native language, there always can be some kind of miscommunication. So sometimes it can be quite funny. Sometimes it can be frustrating. And I think that's a lot of times where things kind of go missed because you think you communicated something clearly, but maybe it wasn't that clear to the other person. And I think the most important is really to take that extra effort and openly discuss really clearly, especially in the beginning of relationships, because you know, it can be very easy to miscommunicate, both a language barrier, but also how you communicate. The way I communicate as an American, the way he communicates as a French can be very different. The same as how I communicate and how I'm communicating to my colleagues here in Taipei. It's a little bit different because they grew up in a different culture than I grew up. So you really adapt and you learn and you kind of have this idea of antenna. So how would they best communicate? How would I best communicate? So that's very clear to everybody. And then one other thing which is really fun as well is when you first start dating someone where their language is different than yours, it's really nice to learn a little bit and pieces of the new language. So for example, when I started dating my husband, he spoke French, right? I didn't speak any French, but of course you want to encourage that. You want to learn a little bit. And whether you're going after being fluent in your partner's language or just learning a little bit, it's good to build the confidence, and it also shows, I think, the willingness and the flexibility. So I think it's really fun, of course. So I think it's always really good to make that effort on both sides. And you'll feel like $1 million when you can actually communicate in another language, whether it's to maybe their parents or to some of their friends who maybe they don't speak English or they don't speak the other language. That's a good way to practice and really push yourself outside the comfort zone. Number 2, so laughing. It sounds like another simple topic, but really, really important, because as I said, mix-ups, they happen, especially when you are first meeting each other, but even long-term when you have just different cultural backgrounds. So it's really a trick is really just to kind of laugh it out a little bit, really accept the misunderstandings, because they'll happen, and just kind of move forward with that. If you take yourself, I think for me, if I don't take myself too seriously, because if you do, a bit too tight, you have to be a little more flexible in the group. I think it's really good. Number 3, be genuinely curious. So when I mean curious is take interest in your partner's life, of course, but also their culture and their background. So where did they grow up? What was their childhood like? What kind of food did they eat? And how can you incorporate with that? So one thing you can easily do, which I think most Taiwanese, I would say, would like this, because Taiwanese, I think abroad, we think of Taiwanese as foodies. You know, whenever you say, oh, I'm going to Taiwan, the first thing that as everyone tells me is, oh, have you tried the food? Oh, their food is so good. So I think that's another thing as well, is try the native food of your partner. And I think it's always really fun. You may not always like it. You may actually really like it. You never know. But I think it shows that you are interested in their culture, and of course opens your mind a lot more. So for me, my experience with the French is of course cheese. So from his region, he's really famous for cheese. And if you joined into our last session, you would have learned maybe some French cheese dishes. So we have raclette, which is a melted cheese. And that's something I had never had before. I never heard of it. I never tried it until I met him. I tried it, and now one of my favorite foods. So I think that's always really fun. And then same for me, even outside of our relationship, we're experiencing the Taiwan culture together. So going on the street, having street food, it's really exciting. And I think food is a natural way to get into a culture, no matter if it's a love relationship or a friend relationship or a new country you're exploring. Food is a great way that really brings people together. And it's something that says a lot about a culture, I think, which is really good. Number 4, so be flexible and understanding. So despite that you may speak different languages, you also have different styles of communicating. So for example, in US, when we communicate, I would say overall, most people are quite direct. When we want to communicate something, we're very direct with it. We don't kind of go around the idea. We really tell you, okay, we want you to do this, this, and this. It's quite clear and forward. But for some cultures, and I've realized this living in different parts of Asia particularly, and also when I first moved to Canada, meeting a lot of international people, was not everyone works that way. I was really naive in the beginning that, oh, okay, if I just want to do something and I want to say something, I just go and say it. But not all cultures do that. There are some cultures are a bit more soft with their approach. They may have to speak actually a lot more around the idea first and then get to the idea towards the end. Versus I think for Americans, we tend to say the idea right away and can proceed to be a bit more pushy in that way. But that's just the way how I grew up. So that's how I communicate. But you really, I think, moving abroad, especially when you first do it, is be open, understanding into everyone's different approach and how they do it. And you'll learn, I think, a lot about how to work internationally, how to make international friends by being very open with how you are. That's, I think, very important. And number 5, be patient. You know, you're gonna have some stumbling blocks along the way, whether you're newly dating someone from another country or meeting a new friend or going to a new place that you've never been to. Is you might not feel comfortable right away. You might feel, oh, I don't feel very good. I feel like maybe I'm not doing the right thing, or maybe I'm saying the wrong thing. It's okay. Be patient with yourself. And also, if you're dating someone for the first time from a new country, be patient with them too, because they're probably feeling the same you're feeling. So really take your time, take things as they go, and really understand where everyone is coming from. Everyone has a different background. So that's really important, to be really patient. Last, which I think is the best part, have fun. At the end, multicultural relationships, they're really enriching, really fulfilling, and you can learn so much about a different culture from an individual, from a group of friends, because they will have so many interesting things that you never even thought about, that they'll come up and bring to the table with you and discuss with you of, you know, whether they think differently than you or not. It's really fun. And I think that's the main thing, is to have fun with it. Those are the 6 topics. And lastly, I have a little bit of kind of things particularly that I learned from American versus French, which I thought were really interesting. And I've had it come up in conversation quite a bit, actually, I would say. So there's the overall question, are we dating or are we hooking up? So in US, this is quite, I think, always a hot topic. So in US, dating tends to be quite casual. So most Americans, they meet in bars or in a club, and now, of course, more recently in dating apps. And it's not necessarily always super serious when you first meet someone. It's quite casual. It can be quite spontaneous. And then even I would notice, you know, for example, moving to Asia versus US, in some cultures, if you move in with someone, so you move in together into the same apartment, that kind of automatically means, okay, these people, they're either married already or they're getting married. But in US, it actually doesn't mean that at all. You can move in with a boyfriend, a girlfriend, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you guys will get married in the future or are married. It's quite accepted as well, too. It's not a surprising thing. So I think that's a big difference between a lot of different cultures. And then also the idea of family. So I noticed, for example, the difference between when I moved to Asia and having some international friends and then having some local Chinese friends in Shanghai, is the difference of family. So in US, I would say overall the family is not as involved in your love life, for example, until the very end, maybe, unless you will be getting married, then you would introduce your partner to your family. But in the beginning, they're not really involved. They're much more on the outside of it. Versus I would say from what I've experienced with some of my Chinese friends is that they're much more actually involved, and the family is much more involved throughout all the steps. So that's a big difference, I would say. And for French, so there's this kind of saying, French don't even have a word for dating. So they don't actually have that vocabulary, the word for date. They rather have a word that means really seeing someone. So what does that mean? So actually the French and this is a big difference in US, which I learned as well, is they don't really say like, oh, I'm dating this person, it's very clear. So in US, it's quite important, especially when you're younger. So if I think about when I was in high school or even university, you make it really official. You have a discussion, you sit down together and you say, yes, we're exclusive. You are my boyfriend, you are my girlfriend, and we are a couple. And it's very clear. And you always kind of has this talk, this big talk. But in French culture, actually, they don't really have this talk, actually. They don't define so much a relationship in the dating way. And I think it's quite interesting. So that's a big difference that I learned as well. And many first dates is not as much of a blind date that we would have in the US, where two people would come together for the first time and have dinner, for example. In France, it's actually much more happening in first dates happening in groups. So maybe meeting all together at a party, for example. That's much more common in France. So the recap, I'll go through the 6 things that I've learned that I think can be applied to many different cultures, many different places, not just French and American, is communicate, always laugh, be genuinely curious, be flexible and understanding, be patient, and really have fun. I think that's, out of all the 6, that's the main thing. Is you can learn so much from each other, and it's a really exciting, whether you're dating someone from a new country or moving abroad and having some new friends from abroad, it's really exciting. It will enrich your life, and it will make you, I think, a much more well-rounded person. So these are question time. So, and also if you have any more questions, you can message us on Instagram or on Facebook. You can also contact and come into our offices. We're happy to answer any questions for you. If you have any questions, please write it in the chat or just unmute yourself and write it. Any questions? Yes, from Iris, it's very encouraging to go abroad to make friends. I think that's, for me, that was the best thing I could have ever done. At 18, leaving my hometown and moving abroad was really opened my eyes. And I feel that it really changed me. So I think that's one of the best things that I've ever done, actually. Perfect. Well, I will leave you guys, and please again find us on Instagram and on Facebook, and let us know if you have any more questions. Thank you so much.